The engine coughed, a wet, rattling gasp that died in the throat of the old sedan. I pressed the accelerator then again, but the silence that followed was absolute, save for the ticking of cooling metal under the hood. The dashboard lights, a faint green glow moments ago, flickered once then vanished. Darkness swallowed the interior, pressing in from the unyielding black outside. I was in a broken-down car, middle of nowhere, lights approaching. A sigh escaped me, ragged and heavy. It wasn't just the car. Everything felt broken lately. A year. It had been a year since her laughter had filled the kitchen, since her hands had smoothed the collar of my shirt, since her eyes, so full of life, had met mine. Sarah. Even now, the sound of her name felt like a splinter under my skin, sharp and constant. This manor, my estranged grandmother's house, was supposed to be a final, desperate attempt at escape. A blank slate, a place so removed from everything I knew. It might just offer a different kind of quiet. The distant lights grew, 2 pinpricks of yellow in the rearview mirror, then expanding into a single, blinding sweep. Relief warred with a sudden, prickling unease. Who else would be out here, on this forgotten stretch of road that wound through miles of skeletal trees and overgrown fields? I watched the headlights approach, the beam cutting through the inky blackness, revealing skeletal branches that clawed at the sky. The vehicle slowed, a hulking shape pulling up behind my dead car. Its engine rumbled, a low, guttural thrum that vibrated through the asphalt. I gripped the steering wheel, gripped tight. A figure emerged from the driver's side, tall and broad, silhouetted against the powerful beams. He didn't speak, just gestured with a tilt of his head towards the front of my car. The air smelled of damp earth and something else, something vaguely metallic, like old rust mixed with rain. The stranger, a local I presumed, wore a heavy work coat, its fabric thick and stained. He didn't offer a name, nor did I. I popped the hood. He peered inside, a flashlight beam dancing over the intricate mess of wires and pipes. He grunted, a noncommittal sound, then straightened. "No good," he stated, his voice a low gravel. "Too far gone, heard you were coming." He offered me a ride, not with warmth, but with a weary practicality. I tossed my bag into the back of his truck, the canvas thudding against cold metal. The ride was silent, punctuated only by the groan of the truck's suspension as we navigated the pitted lane. It loomed, a multi-gabled beast of a building, its countless windows like vacant eyes. Even from a distance, I could sense its age, the way it sagged under the weight of decades. The truck crunched to a halt on the gravel drive. "Good luck," the driver said, his voice flat, devoid of any genuine sentiment. I stood there for a long moment, the key to the front door heavy in my palm. The air here was different. It carried the scent of damp stone, decaying leaves, and something else, something faintly sweet, like forgotten potpourri or dried flowers. It was a smell that clung to the place, an olfactory fingerprint of a life lived and then abruptly abandoned. My grandmother, a woman I barely knew, had passed away 6 months ago, leaving me this, her legacy. A house full of ghosts, real or imagined, was better than the empty shell of our old apartment. The massive oak door, scarred and weathered, groaned as I pushed it open. Dust motes danced in the pale beams, tiny galaxies in a forgotten universe. A grand staircase, its banister intricately carved, swept upwards into the gloom. They were my ancestors, I knew, a lineage I had never truly cared to trace. Now they watched over me, silent and judging. The silence was profound, broken only by the creak of the old house settling, or perhaps just breathing. I ran a hand over a dust-laden table, my fingers leaving a clean streak on the polished wood. Then the drawing room, filled with draped furniture, like shrouded bodies awaiting resurrection. Finally, the library. Bookshelves, stretching from floor to ceiling, lined every wall, their spines a riot of forgotten titles. The air here was thick with the scent of aged paper and leather. It felt like a tomb. I chose a bedroom on the second floor, one with a large bay window overlooking a tangle of overgrown gardens. The bed was stripped, the mattress bare. I unrolled my sleeping bag, pulling out the few necessities I'd packed. As I set my small alarm clock on the bedside table, a faint scratching sound drifted from behind the wall. It wasn't the scurrying of mice, too deliberate for that. It sounded like fingers tracing a pattern on plaster. I froze, listening. The sound stopped. Nothing, it must have been the house settling. An old house makes noises, it breathes, it sighs. But still, a shiver traced its way down my spine. What could have made a sound like that, so precise, so fleeting, then vanish without a trace? The truck's tired engine finally surrendered its low growl, pitching me forward slightly as it shuddered to a halt. The lights, which had appeared abruptly through the rain-streaked windshield, now resolved into the grim, imposing silhouette of the manor. It was larger than I remembered from the faded photographs, a hulking mass of dark stone and skeletal eaves against the bruised twilight sky. Rain, a fine, cold mist, had begun to settle, clinging to the branches of the ancient oaks that crowded the winding drive. "Here I am, William," the driver said, his voice flat, devoid of any inflection. His face, etched with a weariness that went beyond mere fatigue, seemed to hold a flicker of something else. Something I couldn't quite place: apprehension, perhaps, or a deep-rooted resignation. The air was heavy, carrying the scent of something else too, something metallic and old, like forgotten iron. I retrieved my single duffel bag, the canvas scraping against the truck bed. The driver made no move to help, simply watched, his hands clenched loosely on the steering wheel. He gave a curt nod, a barely perceptible dip of his head. "Good luck," he said, the phrase sounding less like a wish and more like a warning. Then, without another word, he reversed with a grinding crunch of gears, turning the truck around in the narrow lane. This was it, my fresh start, my escape from the suffocating weight of recent memory. The house loomed, a monument to something ancient and unyielding. I took a deep, steadying breath, pushing away the tremor that threatened to take root in my chest. I had to be strong. I had to face this. My footsteps on the polished floorboards of the entryway felt deafeningly loud. I fumbled for the light switch, my fingers brushing against the grimy brass plate. Dust motes danced in the anemic light, an entire ecosystem of forgotten particles. The entryway opened into a grand, but equally neglected, living room. Draped sheets covered the furniture, ghostly white mounds in the dim light. I pulled one back, revealing a velvet armchair, its fabric faded and worn, but still possessing a certain dignity. A thin layer of grit coated everything. I ran my hand over the mantelpiece, leaving a clean streak in the grime. This place needed more than a fresh coat of paint. It needed a deep cleansing, a purging of years of accumulated stillness. It felt localized, as if a small pocket of Arctic air had materialized right beside the grand piano, its keys a yellowed, silent grin. I shivered, rubbing my arms. The house was old, of course. Drafty, it was simply the decay, the neglect. My mind was playing tricks, my grief making me hypersensitive. I continued my exploration, moving from room to room on the ground floor. A library, its shelves crammed with leather-bound volumes, their spines cracked and titles unreadable in the poor light. Each space was a tableau of suspended time, waiting. I found nothing of immediate interest, just the echoes of lives long gone. The air grew heavier, pressing in. Here, the dust lay thicker, undisturbed for what felt like decades. The bedrooms were much like the downstairs, shrouded furniture, faded wallpaper peeling at the seams, the lingering scent of stale air and memory. In one of the larger rooms, which I assumed had been my grandmother's, a dressing table stood beneath a tall, arched window. Its surface was cluttered with a few forgotten objects. A tarnished silver comb, a small, stoppered bottle of perfume, its scent long evaporated, and a stack of old photographs. My fingers trembled slightly as I picked them up. They were sepia-toned, brittle with age. Faces stared back at me, unfamiliar and yet undeniably familial. There was my grandmother, younger, her eyes sharp and knowing, standing beside a man whose features were softened by time's blur. Other faces, serious and unsmiling, seemed to peer out from behind them, a silent chorus. One photograph in particular caught my eye, a group of people. Perhaps a family gathering, standing stiffly on the very lawn outside, but their eyes, even in the faded image, held an unsettling intensity, a depth that felt almost predatory. A shiver traced its way down my spine, unrelated to the house's temperature. Just old photos, memories. It was indistinct, a breath of sound, impossible to decipher. I spun around, my heart giving a startled lurch, but there was nothing. The wind, I told myself. Just the wind whistling through a loose pane. This old house was bound to be full of strange noises. I needed to calm down. I pushed aside a heavy velvet curtain that covered a recessed alcove, hoping to find a working outlet. A chest. The wood was intricately carved, depicting swirling, almost grotesque patterns that seemed to writhe in the poor light. It was old, impossibly old, and unlike anything else I had seen in the house. My teeth chattered involuntarily. It wasn't wind. It was something else. A language I didn't understand, yet it felt resonant. It felt like it was for me. My fingers, numb with cold, traced the cold metal of the lock. What could be inside? It was larger than I remembered from the faded photographs, a hulking mass of gables and shadowed windows that seemed to drink the meager light. But the truck wasn't stopping at the manor. Its engine had simply died. I sat there, frozen, the wipers having given up their fight against the deluge. The rain lashed against the glass, a relentless drumming that swallowed all other sound. I twisted the key again, desperate. Nothing, just a weak click. The fuel gauge had been low, I remembered now, a nagging thought I dismissed in my haste to escape the city. Now, stranded, the darkness beyond the single beam of the headlights felt impossibly vast and cold. The air in the cab grew heavy, thick with the smell of damp upholstery and stale exhaust. No signal, of course. This place was truly the middle of nowhere. I leaned my head back, pressing the cold glass against my temple. My breath plumed in the frigid air. A deep, heavy quiet that felt less like an absence of sound and more like a presence watching. Then in the distance, a new set of lights appeared. 2 pinpricks of yellow growing steadily brighter. Relief, hot and sudden, surged through me. A car, someone. I fumbled with the door handle, ready to flag them down, but hesitated. The lights weren't coming from the direction of the main road. They were approaching from a side track I hadn't noticed, cutting through the dense, dripping trees. They seemed to weave, almost float, through the undergrowth. A strange, slow dance. I watched them, my hands still on the cold metal of the door. They grew, illuminating the skeletal branches that clawed at the sky, the glistening leaves, the mud-slicked track. Not a car, too high, too large. A truck, perhaps. But the way it moved, almost silently through the rain-soaked landscape, was unsettling. My heart began to thrum against my ribs, a nervous drumbeat. The lights were almost upon me now, blinding, vast. I squinted, trying to make out a shape, a driver, nothing but glare. Then, with a low rumble that vibrated through the ground, the massive vehicle swept past my broken-down car, middle of nowhere, lights approaching. Without slowing, it was an old logging truck, its trailer empty, its engine coughing a thick plume of black smoke. It didn't stop. Had it even seen me? Or had it just been a phantom, a passing illusion? I spent the next few hours huddled in the car, shivering, listening to the rain and the creaks of the old truck. Eventually, the sky began to lighten, a bruised gray. I started walking. I tried to focus on practicalities. I needed to call someone about the truck, about the power, about anything. My phone was still dead. The landline, when I found it, was silent. No dial tone. I sighed, running a hand over my stubbled jaw. This was not the fresh start I'd envisioned. I brewed some instant coffee on a temperamental gas stove in the cavernous kitchen. The bitter steam did little to warm me. As I stood there, staring out at the rain-lashed garden, a faint scent drifted past me. Rosewater, her favorite. My breath hitched. I closed my eyes, a wave of grief washing over me so powerful it nearly buckled my knees. Just a memory, William, I told myself, a trick of the mind. The house, the isolation, the sheer exhaustion. Later, in what used to be her small study, surrounded by her old leather-bound books, I heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible melody. A lullaby she used to hum to herself when he was lost in thought. A simple tune without words. It came from the direction of the closed door, almost like a breath. I froze, my hand hovering over a dusty volume. Only the drip of rain from the eaves answered me. I waited, straining my ears. Empty. It was the house, I reasoned. Old houses settle, pipes groan, the wind whistles. My mind, still raw from loss, was playing tricks. I was seeing and hearing things that weren't there, desperately clinging to any echo of her. The detective had warned me, hadn't he? That grief could be a powerful hallucinogen. That isolation could warp perception. I needed to talk to someone real, outside this mausoleum. I found my way back to the kitchen, rummaging through a drawer until I found a charger for my phone. It took an agonizingly long time for the screen to flicker to life. I scrolled through my contacts, landing on a name I hadn't called in months. Mark. A former colleague, a pragmatic man. He'd understand. Or at least, he'd listen. William, is that really you? Mark's voice was tinny, distant, laced with surprise. Yeah, it's me. I'm up at the old manor, grandmother's place. Oh, right, how's that going, settling in? His tone was polite, but I could hear the underlying busyness, the slight impatience. It's big and old. Listen, Mark, I know this sounds strange, but... I hesitated, struggling to articulate the unease without sounding completely unhinged. I keep hearing things, seeing things, her scent, her humming. I'm so sorry. I know this must be incredibly hard, you're grieving, and that place I hear it's a bit of a relic, probably just the house playing tricks combined with, well, you know, your mind, you should get out more, see people, come back to the city. His voice was kind but dismissive. It wasn't what I needed. He didn't believe me, he thought I was breaking. No, Markets, it feels real, too real. Look, I've got a meeting in 5. Why don't you get some rest and we'll talk properly later, eh? You're probably just exhausted. He hung up before I could protest further. The line went dead. Mark's words echoed, confirming my deepest fear. I was losing my mind, her face. I stopped dead, my breath catching in my throat. My own reflection was superimposed over it, distorted as if the glass itself was rippling. I blinked hard and the image vanished, leaving only my own gaunt, terrified face staring back. I gripped the edge of a heavy console table, gripped tight. It wasn't real, it couldn't be. My mind was playing tricks. This house, it was getting to me. I took a shaky breath, trying to calm the frantic hammering in my chest. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. There was nothing. And then a faint, almost imperceptible touch on my cheek. A wisp of something like hair, soft and fine, lingering for just a moment before dissolving into nothingness. It carried her scent, potent now, overwhelming. My knees threatened to give out. I stumbled backward, colliding with the console table, sending a small ceramic vase clattering to the floor. It shattered, the sound echoing through the house like a gunshot. Was it her, or was something else, something unseen, using her voice, her touch, her scent to reach out to me, to unravel me piece by piece? A wisp of something like ha. Air, the word died in my throat, swallowed by a wave of nausea. The touch on my cheek lingered, a phantom pressure that prickled my skin, utterly devoid of warmth. I clawed at my face, rubbing violently, trying to erase the sensation. The cold intensified, not just in the air, but seeping into my bones, a deep internal chill that made my teeth ache. I could hear nothing, see nothing, but the silence felt heavy, suffocating. My lungs burned, I needed out. The house, with its ancient timber and dust-laden air, had become a cage. My grief, which had been a dull ache, now felt like a raw nerve, exposed and screaming. I couldn't breathe in here, not anymore. I had to leave. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking so badly I dropped them twice. The clatter echoed, loud and alien in the sudden stillness of the foyer. I snatched them up, practically sprinting to the front door, yanking it open with a desperate heave. I scrambled into my car, the engine turning over with a reluctant groan. I backed out of the driveway, gravel crunching under the tires, and sped down the winding, unlit road, leaving the looming silhouette of the house behind me. The old sedan rattled, its suspension groaning with every pothole. Headlights cut a narrow tunnel through the impenetrable blackness of the surrounding woods. Trees, gnarled and ancient, leaned in from either side, their branches clawing at the sky. I pressed the accelerator, craving distance, craving escape. Then a cough, a sputtering cough from beneath the hood. The engine hiccuped, then caught again, but the sound was rougher, strained. My stomach clenched. No, not now. I eased off the gas, trying to coax it, but it was no use. Another cough, more violent this time. The dashboard lights flickered, then died. I was stranded. I tried the ignition again. Nothing, just a weak, pathetic click. The isolation was immediate, absolute. No cell signal out here. I was truly alone. Then in the far distance, a pinprick of light. Then another, approaching. They were too far to tell what they were, but they were moving steadily closer, twin eyes cutting through the black. My chest tightened. Who would be out here at this hour? What kind of car? A truck maybe, given the rough road. A wave of irrational fear washed over me. The lights grew, brightening, revealing nothing but the intense glow. I didn't want to be found. Not here, not now. I didn't want to explain why I was sitting in a broken-down car, middle of nowhere, lights approaching, shivering and half-mad. I just wanted to disappear. My mind raced. I couldn't stay. I had to go back. I fumbled for the door handle, my fingers numb. I got out, slammed the door shut, and started walking, not daring to look back at the approaching lights, not daring to imagine what might emerge from the gloom. The walk back was a blur of cold air and frantic thoughts. The house, when I finally saw its silhouette against the barely lighter sky, felt less like a refuge and more like a monstrous maw. I slipped inside, closing the door softly, as if not to wake something. My teeth chattered, a rhythm of fear. I was trapped. Utterly, irrevocably trapped. My gaze drifted to the library, a room I hadn't truly explored beyond a cursory glance. It was my grandmother's sanctuary, filled with towering shelves of forgotten texts and the ghosts of her quiet hours. I walked in, drawn by an invisible thread. The scent of aged paper and dust was thick, almost a physical presence. My fingers traced the spines of leather-bound volumes, each one holding untold stories. I stopped at a small writing desk tucked into a corner, its surface scarred with ink stains and faint scratches. This was where she must have spent her final days, perhaps her final hours, writing. Thinking, knowing. A loose panel on the side of the desk caught my eye. My heart hammered against my ribs. I ran my fingers along the seam, pressing, pushing. It gave way with a soft click, revealing a shallow, narrow cavity. Inside, nestled amongst a few dried, brittle flowers, was a small, leather-bound journal. Its cover was worn smooth, the edges frayed, the pages yellowed and brittle. A faint, cloying scent emanated from it, something like dried roses and something else. Something metallic and old. My hands trembled as I lifted it out. It felt heavy, not just with its physical weight, but with the weight of untold secrets. I sat down, the old wooden chair groaning under my weight. It sprang open, revealing pages filled with a delicate, looping script that I recognized as my grandmother's. The ink was faded in places, smudged in others, as if written in haste or distress. The entries were sporadic, fragmented, dated years apart, sometimes only days. They began innocuously enough, observations about the weather, gardening notes, but then the tone shifted. August 14th, 1987, faint at first, like the wind through dead leaves, but I know their sound, I know what they portend. My breath hitched, just like what I'd heard, what I'd felt. October 3rd, 1988, not just in the corners of my vision, but moving, shifting. They watch, always watching. They want something. My own mind, my own eyes had been playing tricks on me, or so I'd told myself. But she saw them too. May 1st, 1990, the hunger grows, it demands the pact. It must be honored, the price is too terrible. But what choice do we have? It consumes all it touches. It must be fed, my line, my family, we are bound. The words blurred before my eyes. Pact, consumes, fed, my line, my family. This wasn't just a haunting. This wasn't just grief twisting my mind. This was something ancient, something inherited, something that ran in my very blood. My grandmother had known, he had lived with it. And now I was here in her house reading her desperate words. What had she meant by the price? What had she paid? And more terrifyingly, what did it mean for me? The words from the journal clawed at my mind, tearing at the thin veil of sanity I'd clung to since her death. Pact, consumes, fed, my line, my family, we are bound. The chilling revelation settled in my bones, a cold weight heavier than the grief that had been my constant companion. This wasn't grief twisting my mind into grotesque shapes. This was something ancient, something with roots deeper than the house itself, something that had chosen me. Panic, a raw, choking thing, seized me. My breath hitched, a ragged sound in the suffocating silence of the study. I couldn't stay. Not another moment. The air grew thick, tasting of dust and decay, but beneath it, a metallic tang like old blood began to prickle my tongue. I had to leave. My hands trembled as I slammed the journal shut, the leather protesting with a dry groan. I scrambled to my feet, my chair scraping harshly against the floorboards. The sound echoed, too loud, too sharp, like a scream. My eyes darted around the room, expecting, what? A face to materialize in the dusty air? Nothing. I stumbled out of the study, the hallway a tunnel of deepening gloom. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees with each step I took towards the main door. I yanked it open, desperate for the night air, for anything that wasn't the suffocating presence of the house. I didn't bother to lock the door behind me, just ran to my car, parked haphazardly on the overgrown driveway. I threw the gear into reverse, gravel spitting under the tires as I backed out, then spun the wheel, sending the car lurching down the winding, unpaved lane. The gnarled branches of ancient trees clawed at the moonless sky. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached, my eyes fixed on the narrow beam of the headlights. I just needed to get to town, to a motel, to anywhere that wasn't here. This wasn't my home. It was a tomb, a trap. The old car rumbled on, the engine whining in protest as I pushed it faster than I ever had. The road was barely more than a dirt track, winding through dense, silent woods. No streetlights, no other cars, just the desperate thrum of my engine and the increasing thump of my own heart against my ribs. Then a cough, a sputtering, the engine died. The sudden silence was a physical blow, deafening after the roar. My momentum carried me a few more feet, then the car lurched to a halt. My breath hitched. No, not now, not here, a weak click. Again. Panic flared, hot and sharp, seizing my throat. I was stranded. Here in the middle of nowhere, a prickle crawled up my neck. I wasn't alone. The air in the car, moments ago stale with my own fear, began to change. A familiar scent, faint at first, then growing stronger, sweeter, filled the confined space. Lavender, my wife's favorite shampoo. My stomach twisted. It couldn't be. The hair on my arms stood on end. My fingers dug into the steering wheel, numb. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to dispel it. To tell myself it was just my mind breaking, just grief. "William, why did you leave me?" The voice was hers, soft, melodic, but threaded with an unbearable sorrow, a deep, aching accusation that pierced me deeper than any knife. My eyes snapped open. It wasn't clear, not solid, but the shape was unmistakable. Her long hair, her slender shoulders, the curve of her neck. My vision blurred with tears, but I forced myself to look, to confirm the impossible. The reflection solidified, gaining definition, becoming clearer, sharper. It was her face, her eyes. But then a subtle distortion began. Her features stretched, elongated, pulling taut like melting wax. Her mouth, once soft and inviting, pulled back in a rictus, revealing teeth too long, too sharp, too numerous. A silent scream ripped from my throat, but no sound escaped. My jaw was locked. He was there in the backseat, a twisted mockery of the woman I loved. Head tilted at an impossible angle. Her lavender scent became sickly sweet, cloying like flowers left too long on a grave. "You promised," the distorted voice hissed, no longer soft. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't move. My gaze was locked on the mirror, on the monstrous parody of my wife, her black eyes boring into mine, filled with an ancient, bottomless malice. This wasn't my wife. This was something else, something wearing her skin. Then in the distance, through the trees, I saw them. Lights approaching, a car, help, or something else entirely. The reflection in the mirror flickered, then vanished. The lavender scent dissipated, leaving behind only the metallic tang, stronger now, almost suffocating. My broken-down car, middle of nowhere, lights approaching. Was it a rescue, or was it coming for me? What was coming for me? The mirror's black depths still held her eyes, those twin abysses, even after I tore my own gaze away. The image seared itself behind my eyelids, a phantom presence that clawed at my throat. My body, a vessel of pure, unadulterated fear, finally lurched into motion. I stumbled back, my legs rubbery, a guttural sound tearing from my chest. It wasn't a scream. It was a dying animal's rasp. I didn't think, I couldn't. My mind was a shattered pane of glass, reflecting only terror. The front door, the car keys, the engine's roar, these were instincts, not decisions. I fumbled with the key, my fingers numb, the metal an alien thing in my grasp. The engine coughed, then caught, a blessedly familiar rumble. I slammed the gearshift into reverse, tires spitting stones, and tore down the long, winding driveway. The house, a skeletal silhouette against the moonless sky, receded in my rearview mirror, but its presence remained, a suffocating weight in the air behind me. My breath hitched. My vision blurred. I drove, the speedometer needle climbing. The old sedan rattling like a skeleton. I just needed to be away. Away from the house, away from her eyes, away from the impossible horror that had leered from my own reflection. The road, barely more than a dirt track, stretched out, swallowed by the dense canopy of trees that pressed in on either side. Then a cough from the engine, a sputter. The acceleration faltered. No, not now. I pressed the pedal, urging it on, but the engine whined, a dying gasp, and then went silent. I was in a broken-down car in the middle of nowhere. My heart hammered against my ribs, a trapped bird desperate for escape. Nothing. I leaned back against the seat, my head thudding against the headrest, and squeezed my eyes shut. The image of her, was there, waiting. I opened my eyes again, forcing myself to look into the impenetrable black outside the windows. The trees loomed, monstrous, silent sentinels. My hands clenched the steering wheel. Grip tight, a low moan escaped me. I was trapped. Then far down the road behind me, a pinprick of light appeared, 2 pinpricks. They grew steadily, cutting through the gloom. Headlights, another car, someone, anyone, help, no signal, of course. The lights approached, slow and deliberate, illuminating the path I had just taken. The vehicle was moving slowly, too slowly for a simple passerby. It was too quiet. The engine's sound, when it finally reached me, was a low thrum. Almost a purr, not the familiar rattle of an old truck or the hum of a modern sedan. What kind of vehicle moved like that, so silently, in the dead of night, so far from any main road? I sank lower in the seat, trying to make myself invisible. My eyes, wide and unblinking, fixed on the approaching glare. The lights grew brighter, closer, revealing the curve of the road, the deep ruts, the skeletal branches reaching over the path. The vehicle was almost upon me now, its presence a heavy weight in the air. I could almost feel its heat, its vibration. Then just as I braced myself, expecting it to pass, expecting it to stop, the lights veered. They turned off the road into the dense woods on my left, disappearing as suddenly as they had appeared. There was no sound of crashing branches, no snapping twigs, no roar of an engine forcing its way through the undergrowth. Again, my breath caught in my throat. I stayed frozen, every nerve screaming. What had that been? Who would drive a car into the woods like that without a sound? I didn't move for what felt like an hour, trapped in the suffocating black, the phantom image of those veering lights burning behind my eyes. My muscles ached from tension. The house, for all its horrors, had a roof, a door, a library. It had answers, perhaps, or at least the potential for answers. I forced myself out of the car, my legs stiff, the gravel crunching under my boots. The walk back to the manor was an eternity of rustling leaves and imagined footsteps behind me. I didn't look back at the car. I couldn't. Back inside, the house seemed to breathe around me, a silent, ancient thing. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked, a slow, deliberate rhythm that seemed to mark my frantic pulse. The air was thick with dust and the scent of decay, but also something else, something metallic and sharp, like old blood. I bypassed my bedroom. The memory of the mirror, a fresh wound. Sleep was an impossible luxury. Understanding, however faint, was my only path forward, my only weapon. I found myself in the grandmother's study, a room I had barely touched since my arrival. It was a mausoleum of forgotten knowledge, packed with towering bookshelves, a heavy oak desk, and stacks of yellowed papers. Dust motes danced in the solitary beam of my flashlight, illuminating the chaotic layers of generations. The air was heavy, stagnant tasting of old paper and dried ink. I pulled down a thick, leather-bound volume from a shelf, its cover flaking under my touch. It was a local history, dense with archaic language and faded engravings. I worked through the night, driven by a desperate, gnawing need. My eyes burned, tracing lines of text, searching for anything, any thread, any echo of what I had seen. I found mentions of the manor, of my family line, stretching back centuries. There were dry accounts of prosperity, of land acquisitions, of civic duties. But nestled within the mundane, like thorns in a rosebush, were the anomalies. The melancholic withdrawal of the matriarch Alara in the autumn of 1782, though no trace was ever found. The affliction of the wandering sickness that claimed the mind of Alina in 1899. Madness, always vague, always attributed to natural causes, or the isolation, or simply the family disposition. But the pattern, once I started looking, was undeniable. I dug deeper, through old newspaper clippings stored in a dusty box labeled Local Interest. Most were mundane, but a few caught my eye. Reports of livestock inexplicably dying, drained of blood, something that lived in the woods surrounding this very house. This wasn't just my grief. This was something ancient, something woven into the very fabric of this place, into the very blood of my family. My grandmother hadn't just lived here, he had been a part of this. What exactly had she been researching in this room, so meticulously, so secretly, before she died? The faded newsprint curled under my fingers, brittle with age. Disappearances, madness, always vague. The words echoed the murmurs I'd heard about my family, dismissed as eccentricities, a chilling repetition. Names I didn't know, faces blurred by time, all met the same ambiguous end. I dug deeper, through old newspaper clippings stored in a dusty box labeled Local Interest. The last letter was torn, but I didn't need it. The interest was clear. It was my family. A chill snaked up my spine, not from the drafty study, but from the cold certainty settling in my gut. The air grew heavy, thick like wet wool. I pushed back from the desk, the chair scraping loudly on the floorboards, a sound that seemed to stretch and distort, reverberating with unnatural length. I needed to clear my head, to walk away from the accumulating evidence of my family's cursed lineage, if only for a moment. I stepped into the hallway, intending to reach the kitchen for a glass of water, but the hallway, it felt different, longer. The wallpaper, which I'd meticulously memorized in my lonely hours, seemed to shift its pattern. The floral motifs twisting into something more angular, more predatory. I shook my head. Tiredness, I told myself, grief playing tricks. I reached for the doorknob to the dining room, a room I'd walked through countless times. It was locked. I tried again, twisting the brass handle, pushing my shoulder against the heavy wood. Nothing, it wouldn't budge. My breath hitched. I hadn't locked it. I never locked it. A faint scratching sound, like fingernails on dry wood, seemed to emanate from behind the door. I pulled my hand back as if burned. Turning, I tried the parlor door, also locked. Panic began to prickle at the edges of my composure. I moved faster, a hurried shuffle down the corridor, trying every door. Each one resisted, a solid, unyielding barrier. The grand staircase, usually a familiar landmark, now seemed to spiral upwards into an inky blackness that swallowed the ceiling. The house was changing. Around me, for me. I tried to retrace my steps to the study, but the hallway behind me had narrowed, the walls pressing in. The scent of dust and old paper was gone, replaced by a damp, earthy smell like a freshly dug grave. Each breath rasped in my throat. I felt a pressure behind my eyes, a dull throb that intensified with every disorienting step. I peered into it, the gloom so absolute it seemed to absorb the faint light from the distant window. What was in there? Another room. I spun around, desperate to find an exit. My own front door. It had to be there. I stumbled, my feet catching on something unseen. I reached out, bracing myself against a wall that felt suddenly rough and splintered, not the smooth plaster I remembered. The air tasted metallic. Then a flicker, a memory, my wife, her smile, her laugh. It was so real, so vivid, I could almost feel the warmth of her hand in mine. It wasn't a memory. The walls seemed to ripple. The images intensified, not just of her, but of all the others from the clippings. Their panicked faces, their desperate struggles, their final, vacant stares. I couldn't stay here, I had to get out. I ran, not towards the front door I couldn't find, but towards the back, towards the garage, towards my car. My only way out. The house fought me, the floorboards buckling, the air growing thick, resisting my movement. My lungs burned. My legs ached. I burst through what felt like a service door out into the night. The cold air hit me, a shock. I fumbled with the keys, my hands trembling. I tried again, the battery or something worse. I slammed my fist against the steering wheel, a wave of despair washing over me. Then I saw them, far off but undeniably approaching. Headlights. Who would be out here in the middle of nowhere at this hour, and why now? There was this salvation or another manipulation. The lights grew brighter. Two piercing beams cutting through the gloom, heading directly for my broken-down car, middle of nowhere, lights approaching. I could feel the thrum of an engine, a low vibration that seemed to resonate in my teeth. I tried the ignition again, frantically, uselessly. The lights were close, too close. Then I blinked. I was back in the study, slumped over the newspaper clippings. The car, the road, the approaching lights. A dream, a hallucination. I scrambled back from the desk. Heart pounding. The study door was ajar. The hallway beyond, familiar, silent. Had I moved at all, or had the house merely shown me an escape that was never real? The images twisted, a kaleidoscope of agony behind my eyes. Not just her face, contorted in that final, silent scream, but the others too. The faded photographs from the clippings, suddenly vibrant with life and terror. Their mouths stretched open, silent pleas echoing in the reverberating groan of the house. The walls pulsed, a living membrane, and the floorboards beneath my feet felt like a taut drum skin ready to burst. I could almost taste the metallic tang of their fear, sharp and acrid on my tongue. This was a consumption, a slow, deliberate devouring, and I was next. The thought solidified with a sickening certainty, chilling me to the marrow. I had to get out. Now, my legs, heavy with leaden fear, somehow found their purpose. The front door felt miles away. The dark hallway, a tunnel of whispering shadows that clawed at my periphery. The night air, though frigid, was a balm against the suffocating presence inside. I didn't look back. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so violently I nearly dropped them in the overgrown gravel. The engine coughed, sputtered, then caught with a ragged roar. I sped down the winding, unpaved driveway, the tires crunching loudly, the only sound louder than my own ragged breathing. I drove blindly, desperately away from the manor, away from the echoes, away from the encroaching madness. The road was narrow, barely more than a forgotten track, winding deeper into the desolate countryside. Each turn felt like an escape, each mile a victory, however small. The fear, however, clung to me, a suffocating cloak that no speed could outrun. Then a cough, not from me but from the car, a series of metallic clangs from under the hood. The engine sputtered again, a dying gasp, and the dashboard lights flickered, then died. The car lurched, coughed once more, and then rolled to a silent, shuddering stop. The engine ticked, cooling its final death throes. The air outside was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. I pressed the ignition again, uselessly. Nothing. Panic clawed at my throat. I was truly stranded, exposed. The house might be behind me, but its reach felt infinite. The silence was not empty, it was waiting. My gaze drifted to the passenger seat. There, amidst the detritus of old maps and forgotten snacks, lay a small leather-bound journal. My grandmother's, I realized. It must have fallen out of the box I'd carried from the study. I hadn't dared open it in the house. Now, in this desolate pocket of night, it felt like the only anchor to something tangible. The pages were brittle, filled with elegant, looping script. Not the ramblings of a madwoman, as I had once suspected, but careful, precise entries, dates, names, and then a pattern, generations. Each entry spoke of a gift, a burden, a tribute, and always the mention of the chorale. Not a choir, not music, but something else, something that sang through the generations. One entry, dated nearly a century ago, detailed the original pact. My ancestor, a man named Thomas, had faced ruin. A blight on his lands, a plague among his livestock, a strange affliction that stole the breath from his children. He had sought protection, not from a god, but from something older, something beneath the earth beyond the veil. A whisper in the dark, offering solace, offering power, offering escape from a different, perhaps more immediate horror. The price, a bond, a promise, a designated inheritor every few generations to become an anchor, a vessel, a bridge. My breath hitched. The pieces slammed together with brutal force. The strange disappearances in the clippings, the vacant stares, my wife's sudden, inexplicable decline, the way her eyes had seemed to hold a different light in her final weeks, an echo of someone else. She hadn't been protecting herself. He had been protecting me, or trying to. I wasn't just a victim caught in a cursed house. I was the designated inheritor, the next anchor, the chosen one. The chorale of echoes wasn't just haunting the house, it was waiting for me. It had lured me back, drawn me in through grief, through legacy, through blood. It had been playing a long game, and I was the final move. My muscles locked. I was not just fighting for my sanity or even my life. I was fighting for my very self, against something that sought to wear my skin, to sing through my voice, to live through my memories. Pinpricks of light, growing steadily brighter, approaching down the desolate road. Headlights, 2 of them, moving slowly, deliberately. Not a passing motorist, not an accidental discovery. They were coming for me, and I knew with a certainty that curdled my blood that whatever they belonged to, it wasn't here to help. What did they want? The groan had not faded. It vibrated in my teeth, a low, resonant thrum that seemed to emanate from the very stone of the manor. The faces, twisted in silent screams, still swam behind my eyelids, their agony a fresh coat of paint on my own grief. My wife's face. Always her, but now others too, those forgotten ancestors from the brittle photographs, their fear a shared inheritance. I stumbled back from the archive room, the scent of mildew and desperation clinging to my clothes. The air was thick, heavy, pressing down on my lungs. I needed out. Now, my hands fumbled for the car keys, a jangling metallic symphony against the oppressive silence of the house. Each step I took, the floorboards groaned beneath my weight, mimicking the sound that still echoed in my ears. The front door, usually a stubborn beast, swung open with an unnerving ease, as if inviting my departure or perhaps marking it. I didn't look back. The cold night air hit me sharp and clean, momentarily clearing the fog from my mind. I sprinted across the overgrown drive, gravel crunching under my hurried steps, the looming silhouette of the manor shrinking behind me. The old sedan coughed to life, its engine sputtering a reluctant protest. I slammed the gear into reverse, tires spitting loose stones as I backed out, then forward, down the winding, unpaved lane. My breath came in ragged gasps, but a fragile thread of hope tightened in my chest. Freedom, just a few more miles. The trees lining the lane were gaunt sentinels, their bare branches clawing at the moonless sky. The headlights cut a narrow path, pushing back the encroaching blackness that seemed denser here, deeper. I drove. The asphalt, when I finally reached it, was a welcome relief, a smooth ribbon promising escape. I pressed the accelerator, the old engine whining, straining. The speedometer needle climbed, then wavered. The road stretched ahead, an endless tunnel of my own making. Minutes bled into an hour, then more. Had I passed any landmarks, any turn-offs? A shudder ran through the vehicle. The engine coughed again, a wet, rattling sound, then a violent jerk. My foot pressed the pedal to the floor. but the car only sputtered, slowing, then rolling to a complete final stop. No crickets, no wind-rustling leaves, no distant hum of civilization. Nothing. I was in a broken-down car, middle of nowhere, just a weak click. This couldn't be happening, not now, not when I was so close. A faint tremor ran through the car, a vibration that felt less like a mechanical fault and more like a low hum against the soles of my feet. The air thickened, pressing against my eardrums. Then, through the rearview mirror, I saw them, pinpricks of light in the distance, growing steadily brighter. Headlights. Hope surged, irrational and desperate. Someone, anyone. The air was still heavy, tasting faintly of damp earth and something else, something metallic and acrid. The lights approached. They weren't moving like a normal vehicle. They swayed, bobbed, grew too quickly, too intensely. There was no engine sound, no crunch of tires on gravel, only that low, resonant hum, now growing louder, vibrating in the very ground beneath my feet. This wasn't a rescue. This was a pursuit. I shielded my eyes, but the intensity burned through my palms, leaving ghostly afterimages. The hum became a guttural roar, a sound that wasn't sound, but a physical pressure against my skull. It felt like 1,000 voices, ancient and hungry, speaking in unison, yet utterly silent. My vision swam. The trees on either side of the road began to twist, their branches elongating, intertwining into a grotesque, thorny cage. The asphalt beneath me rippled, as if the very ground was melting. Through the blinding glare, a shape began to coalesce within the light. Not a car, not a truck. It had no defined edges, yet it felt impossibly close, its presence a suffocating weight. A voice, or a chorus of voices, thrummed directly inside my mind, a language of pure feeling, of ancient hunger. It wasn't spoken words, but an undeniable understanding that slammed into me with the force of a physical blow. I am bound. We claim what is ours. I am the host. I am the echo. The world tilted. My feet slipped on the undulating ground. I felt hands, impossibly strong, unseen, clamp around my arms, my chest, pulling me. My muscles screamed in protest. I thrashed, desperate, but the grip was absolute, relentless. It wasn't just pulling me. It was absorbing me, drawing me into its impossible light and sound. My bones felt like they would shatter. My vision dissolved into a kaleidoscope of swirling agony, the faces from the photographs flashing before me, their mouths open, their silent screams now my own. My head struck something hard, a jarring impact that sent a white-hot pain exploding behind my eyes. The air was thick with the scent of dust and decay. A faint, resonant hum still vibrated in the floorboards beneath me. My jaw throbbed. A thin stream of warm liquid trickled from my nose. I pushed myself up, my hands trembling, and looked around. The front door was closed, latched tight. How had I gotten back inside? The world did not tilt. It shattered. My body, stretched taut, snapped back into itself with a sickening thwack that rattled my teeth. I gasped, a raw, grating sound torn from a throat suddenly parched. The light, that scalding, cold brilliance, vanished, leaving behind a residual ache behind my eyes, like staring too long at the sun. I was on the floor, sprawled beside the overturned armchair in the study, a forgotten journal splayed open inches from my face. My fingers, still tingling, remembered the impossible grip, the sensation of being drawn through a keyhole too small for my frame. I pushed myself up, my limbs heavy, uncooperative. The study was exactly as I'd left it, dust motes dancing in the weak afternoon light filtering through the grimy window panes, the scent of old paper and mildew. Yet it felt different, thinner. The air hummed with a low, almost inaudible vibration that settled in my bones. My skin crawled. It wasn't a vision, not merely a hallucination brought on by grief. It was an invasion, a scouting party. The entity had touched me. It had tried to pull me. A cold dread began to seep through the exhaustion, crystallizing into a horrifying clarity. It wasn't just preying on my grief, on my weakness. It was consuming, not just memories, not just emotions. It was consuming me. It wanted to devour my mind whole, to integrate itself, to use my consciousness as an anchor in this reality, in this house. The manor wasn't just a nexus. It was a vessel, and I, the inheritor, was to be its final, most potent anchor. My mind, my very self, was the ultimate prize. The chorale of echoes wasn't just a cacophony of the dead. It was a hungry, formless thing that yearned for a body, a mind, a presence to solidify its existence. My breath hitched. The thought was a shard of ice in my chest. It wasn't about vengeance or haunting. It was about survival, about propagation. And I was the next designated host. I scrambled for the journals, my fingers clumsy. I had read them countless times, poring over the cryptic entries, the half-mad scrawlings of my ancestors. They spoke of the pact, of the sacrifices, of the Corail, but always with a veiled fear and implied helplessness. But there had to be more. There had to be a way to fight back, a way to sever the connection not just for myself, but for every generation bound to this horror. I found it, finally, not in the main narrative, but in a series of margin notes, almost illegible. Penned in a different hand, perhaps an ancestor even more desperate than my grandmother. It spoke of a counter-resonance, a way to disrupt the entity's frequency, to make this reality anathema to its formless presence. It wasn't a banishment, it was a rejection. The ritual was vague, terrifying. It involved a personal tether, something of immense emotional significance, something that resonated with the entity's own hunger for connection. It needed to be a sacrifice, not of life, but of a memory, an object, a piece of self that represented the very thing the Corail sought to consume. It had to be offered not in supplication, but in defiance, imbued with a counterwill strong enough to repel. And it had to be done in the heart of the anchor, the place where the pact was strongest, the manor's deepest foundation, or perhaps the very core of my own being. My gaze fell on the small wooden music box on the mantelpiece, Sarah's music box, the one she'd loved. That played our wedding song. My throat tightened. No, not that. It was too precious. It was all I had left of her untainted. But what else could resonate so deeply with my grief, with my love, with the very fabric of what the entity sought to consume? What else held such concentrated emotional weight? The ritual demanded a crucible of memory and defiance. It demanded a piece of us. The idea was abhorrent. To use the last tangible link to my wife, to risk corrupting it, destroying it to fuel some desperate, ancient ritual. It felt like a betrayal. But what was the alternative? My hands trembled. I picked up the music box, its polished wood cool beneath my fingers. A faint, sweet scent of lavender and old roses, her scent seemed to cling to it. This was my tether. This was my sacrifice. It was reacting. It knew I was planning something. Panic flared. I had to get out. Just for a moment. The front door was a distant beacon. I burst out, the cool evening air a shock against my flushed skin. I found myself behind the wheel of my car, the engine sputtering, then dying, somewhere down the long, overgrown drive. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. The moon was a sliver, barely piercing the heavy cloud cover. I tried the ignition again, a futile grind. Nothing. It wasn't the car, it was the house. It wouldn't let me leave. I beat my fists against the steering wheel, a roar tearing from my chest. This was it. There was no escape, only this. Then, through the dense foliage ahead, a faint glow appeared. 2 pinpricks of light, headlights approaching. They was it help, a passing stranger. But as they drew closer, the light didn't seem to illuminate the road. It seemed to bend it. The twin beams pulsated, too bright, too steady for any ordinary vehicle. My breath caught. What was approaching me in the broken-down car in the middle of nowhere? With those terrible, luminous lights, the light, that scalding, cold brilliance, vanished, leaving behind a residual ache behind my eyes, a phantom pressure in my skull. I blinked, trying to clear the static that coated my vision, but the world remained a blur of shifting grays and deeper, bruised purples. A groan escaped me, the sound tasting like dust and something metallic. My head lolled. The chill of the air bit at my exposed skin, sharper than anything I remembered from the manor's oppressive clamminess. A strange, acrid smell, like burnt oil mixed with damp earth, filled my nostrils. I pushed up, my limbs screaming in protest, every muscle a knot of agony. My hands, when I finally forced them into my sight, were grimy, scraped raw in places. I was hunched over, crammed into a space far too small, the metal pressing against my ribs. It took another agonizing moment for my eyes to focus, to parse the fragmented reality around me. I was in a car. A broken-down car, the windshield a spiderweb of cracks, the dashboard a mangled mess of wires and twisted plastic. My breath hitched. How had I gotten here? I stumbled out of the wreck, my legs threatening to buckle. The ground beneath my worn shoes was a patchwork of gravel and cracked asphalt, stretching into nothingness. Middle of nowhere. The sky above was a bruised canvas, the last vestiges of twilight bleeding into an inky black. No manor, no trees, just an endless, desolate expanse, punctuated only by the skeletal remains of what might have been a fence line, long since swallowed by rust and neglect. A desolate wind whipped past, carrying the scent of something distant and rotten. Had I lost? Had I been cast out? There was this another illusion, another twisted trick of the corail? No, this felt different, too real. The ache in my bones, the sting of the wind, the metallic tang on my tongue. This was concrete, tangible. My mind, still reeling from the sensory assault, struggled to grasp the situation. I was William. I had a purpose. I had to fight. Then in the distance a pinprick of light appeared, two of them growing steadily brighter, headlights approaching. My heart hammered against my ribs, not with fear, but with a sudden, primal surge of adrenaline. Who could be out here? A rescuer? My determination, dulled by disorientation, sharpened. I wasn't going to be caught, not here, not now. I glanced around, desperate for cover, but there was nothing. Just the flat, unforgiving landscape. The lights grew, illuminating the road in flickering flashes, revealing the skeletal remains of forgotten road signs, bent and twisted like supplicants. I could hear the faint hum of an engine now, a low thrum that vibrated through the ground. I had to move. I couldn't be found. Not while I was still trying to piece together what had happened, not while I still had a fight left in me. The hum grew into a roar. I held my breath, pressing myself against the unforgiving earth, the gravel digging into my cheek. The driver, a silhouette behind the wheel, did not slow, did not turn. It passed, a whirlwind of dust and engine noise, and then the lights were receding, swallowed by the vast, empty night. I let out a shaky breath, pushing myself up. That was too close. My head throbbed. The manor. I had to get back to the manor. It was the nexus. It was where the fight had to happen. I started walking, not knowing which direction, only driven by an insistent, desperate need to return. I would not be defeated, not by a trick of reality, not by a detour into nowhere. Hours passed, or minutes. Time became a fluid, unreliable thing. The landscape began to subtly shift. The flat, desolate road gave way to overgrown, tangled paths. The air grew heavier, thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, a familiar, unsettling perfume. And then, through a veil of mist that clung to the trees like funeral shrouds, I saw it, or what seemed to be the manor. It loomed, a jagged silhouette against a sky that had turned a sickly green, an impassable color. I pushed through the rusted gate, its groan a mournful cry that echoed far too long. The air here was different, charged, heavy with an electric tension that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. The ground underfoot felt strangely spongy, yielding, as if the very earth had softened with decay. I stepped inside. The grand foyer was a grotesque parody of itself. The chandelier, once a glittering cascade of crystals, was now a skeletal cage of twisted metal, some of its glass shards resembling sharpened teeth. The ornate wallpaper peeled in strips that writhed in the unseen currents of air. Like flayed skin, a trick. I knew it was a trick. "I won't let I said, my voice hoarse but steady. I clutched the small, tarnished silver locket in my hand, the one I had taken from my grandmother's hidden drawer. It was a tether. The air grew thick, like breathing through wet wool. Memories, not my own, began to bleed into my perception. They were overlaid with my own grief, amplifying it, twisting it into a suffocating shroud. The house was not just decaying. It was living. The walls pulsed, a slow, rhythmic beat that resonated in my eardrums. The floorboards shifted beneath my feet, creaking not from age, but with a deliberate, muscular flex. The scent of ozone mingled with something cloying, sweet, and deeply unpleasant, like rotting flowers. I reached the study, the place where I had first found the journals, where the truth had begun to unravel. It was transformed. The bookshelves were gone, replaced by towering, organic growths that writhed like tentacles, their surfaces slick and glistening. It hummed, a low, guttural vibration that resonated directly in my teeth, in my skull. The chorale of echoes, this was it. My hands trembled, but my resolve did not falter. I had to face it. I had to end it. I brought the locket up, my fingers fumbling for the clasp. My grandmother's notes had been cryptic but clear enough. A silencing, a severance, a refusal. This locket, he had implied, was not just a symbol but a key. You don't get me. I held the locket out towards the column, towards the heart of the entity, my voice rising. I sever the pact. I refuse the echoes. The manor convulsed around me. Walls cracked, plaster rained down like dusty snow. The floor bucked, throwing me off balance. The air itself turned to ice, then to searing heat, then back again, a dizzying, sickening fluctuation. My wife's face materialized again, closer this time, his eyes burning with an impassable, sorrowful light. "William, I don't understand, but I did. I had to. I pushed through the pain, through the grief, through the agonizing guilt that the corail amplified, using it as fuel for my defiance. I raised the locket higher, feeling a strange energy radiating from it, a counterforce to the entity's overwhelming presence. It pulsed faster, an erratic, desperate beat. The temperature in the room plummeted and then soared again. Sweat and ice battling for dominance on my skin. The stench of ozone intensified, mixed now with something else, something ancient and foul, like dust from a tomb. Had I truly found its weakness? Was this the beginning of the end, or merely the prelude to my own final, agonizing consumption? What horrors would it unleash to stop me? The shimmering current of the corail intensified, a discordant symphony of forgotten whispers and stolen grief that tore at the edges of my vision. It was no longer a shadow, no longer just a presence that lurked in the corners of my perception. It was a twisting, churning maelstrom of raw, agonizing emotion, solidifying into something I could almost touch, yet dared not name. The air grew thick, like breathing dust and ash, clinging to my throat, tasting of rust and decay. My skin prickled, 1,000 invisible needles digging into my flesh, each one a memory of pain that wasn't mine, yet felt utterly real. I raised the locket higher, the silver warm against my palm, radiating a steady, defiant thrum. It pulsed, a small, stubborn heartbeat against the vast, consuming emptiness the entity represented. The corail recoiled, a shriek of silent agony tearing through the space where the manor's walls had been moments before, or had they? The grand hall, with its peeling wallpaper and dust-shrouded chandeliers, was dissolving, melting like old film stock under a heat lamp. A violent lurch threw me forward. My head slammed against something hard, jarring my teeth. A metallic tang filled my mouth. When I blinked, the ornate, decaying interior of the manor was gone. The air was frigid, cutting, smelling of damp earth and stale gasoline. My breath plumed white in front of me. I was in a car. A broken-down car. In the middle of nowhere. The interior was cramped, smelling of mildew and old cigarettes. The dashboard was cracked, the seats ripped, springs poking through the threadbare fabric. Beyond that, a vast, featureless expanse, punctuated by the ghostly silhouettes of skeletal trees. No house, no road, just an endless, desolate plain under a sky that felt too close, too heavy. Had I driven here? Had I run? The memory was a blank, a smooth, polished stone where a complex tapestry should have been. The corail had done this. It had stolen the journey, leaving me marooned, disoriented, poised for its final strike. My stomach roiled, a knot of nausea and fear tightening with every ragged breath. My fingers, numb and clumsy, fumbled with the locket, trying to grip it tighter. The entity coalesced outside the car, not as a solid form, but as a distortion in the air itself. It was the absence of light, the negative space of every memory it had ever consumed, woven into a terrifying, shifting tapestry. It pressed against the windows, not shattering the glass, but making it ripple, making the metal groan as if under immense pressure. "Give it to me, William." The thought wasn't a voice, but a wave of pure, concentrated despair washing over me, threatening to drown me. "Give me what I cling to. Give me the last vestiges of her. Let me consume it, and I will leave I safe." It wanted her. It wanted the raw, unvarnished memories of my wife, the ones I had guarded with every fiber of my being, the ones that were both my greatest torment and my only solace. To give them up would be to truly lose her, to erase her from my internal world, to become a ghost haunting my own life. But the locket vibrated, growing harder in my grip, almost burning. It wasn't just a shield, it was a conduit. It showed me a path, not banishment, not destruction but containment. A sacrifice, yes, but one that could trap the entity, not merely appease it. The cost was unthinkable. My hands trembled. I could feel it peeling back layers of my mind like an onion searching for the core. I saw flashes of her smile, the way her hair caught the light, the scent of her perfume on a forgotten scarf. Not like that. I closed my eyes, focusing on the locket, on the warmth spreading from it into my arm, up to my shoulder, then into my chest. It was an anchor, a focus for my will. I pictured the memories of her, not as something I was losing, but as something I was offering. A cage, a bait, a final, desperate act of love. The pain was immediate, searing, unlike anything I had ever known. It wasn't physical but deeper, a tearing at the very fabric of my being. It felt like my soul was being flayed, piece by agonizing piece. The memories didn't just fade, they were ripped from me, leaving gaping, bleeding wounds in their wake. Another flash. Her voice, her touch, the warmth of her hand in mine gone. Each extraction was a silent scream, echoing only in the cavern of my skull. The corail pulsed, a monstrous hunger devouring the offerings. It swelled, growing in density, absorbing the very essence of my grief, my love, my loss. It was gorging itself, drawing inward, consolidating. It wasn't just consuming, it was being drawn into the locket, pulled into its intricate silver shell, compressed, contained. I slumped against the steering wheel, gasping, my body racked with tremors. The corail was gone, or it was inside. The locket, still warm, had gone silent. Its light faded to a faint glow that pulsed faintly like a dying ember. It felt heavy, impossibly heavy, a leaden weight in my hand. I opened my eyes, my vision blurry, my head swimming. The sky was still too close, but no longer felt heavy. Profound emptiness settled in my chest, an ache that went beyond grief, beyond sorrow. It was the absence of something fundamental, something that had defined me. I could remember I had a wife. I could remember her name, but the vividness, the texture, the emotional resonance of 1,000 shared moments, they were gone. Then, through the inky blackness, far in the distance, a pair of lights appeared. They were small at first, 2 pinpricks of yellow, then growing steadily brighter, closer. Headlights. Approaching. Who was out here? And what would they find? A final, desperate act. The world shattered, or perhaps I did. A sound like 1,000 voices screaming through wet concrete, all of them mine, tore through the air, shaking the very bones of the house. It was a symphony of despair, a chorus of echoes that wasn't outside me but inside. My skull vibrated, a hollow drum. My teeth ached, my gums bled. I felt a tearing sensation, not of flesh, but of something deeper, something woven into the fabric of my being. The memories, her smile, the scent of her hair, the exact pitch of her laugh I had offered them, a bait, a cage, and it had taken. Then silence. My ears rang, a high, thin whine that slowly faded, leaving behind only the distant drip of water somewhere deep in the manor's foundations. My chest heaved, air rasping in my throat. I tasted copper and ash. My eyes, still squeezed shut, felt gritty, as if I'd been weeping sand. I opened them. The great hall was still. The dust motes danced in the sliver of moonlight from the broken window, ordinary and mundane. The air, which had been thick with an unseen pressure, a palpable weight, now felt thin, almost brittle. It was as if the very essence of being had been sucked out of the space. My grandmother's portrait, which had always seemed to follow me with its eyes, now stared blankly ahead, a flat, painted surface. I tried to stand, but my legs buckled. My muscles felt like overstretched rubber bands, my joints like rusty hinges. I looked at it, then at my hand. My skin was pale, almost translucent in the dim light. Veins stood out, stark blue lines beneath the surface. Had I always been this fragile? A tremor ran through me, a shiver that started in my spine and spread outwards. A reverberation, a faint hum that wasn't in the air but in my bones. I pressed my hands to my temples, trying to still the internal vibration. It wasn't painful, not exactly, but it was persistent, a low, resonant thrum. The house was empty now, I was sure of it. The presence was gone. The thing, the corail, whatever it truly was, had been satiated, trapped. My memories, my grief, my love, I had poured them into that locket, into that final, desperate act. And it had worked. I was free. I was alive, but was I? I pushed myself up, leaning heavily against a carved newel post. The wood felt rough under my fingertips. I began to walk, one slow, dragging step after another. Each movement was an effort, as if I was pushing through invisible molasses. I needed to get out, away from this place. The journey from the manor was a blur. I remembered stumbling down the overgrown drive, the gravel crunching under my worn shoes. I remembered the gate creaking open, a sound like a forgotten lament. I just walked. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to put distance between myself and that terrible, echoing emptiness. My mind felt like a sieve, moments slipping through, leaving only impressions. A flash of moonlight on wet leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, the constant internal hum. It must have been hours. My feet ached, my throat was raw. I remember thinking, I just need to stop, just for a moment. And then I saw it, my car, or what was left of it. It sat hunched by the side of the road, a crumpled, rusty monument to futility. The windshield was spiderwebbed with cracks, the driver's side door ajar, hanging at an odd angle. I didn't remember driving it here. I didn't remember abandoning it. My memory was a patchwork quilt, frayed and torn. I vaguely recalled the previous night, the frantic drive away from the manor, the sudden lurch, the grinding halt, the sickening impact. Had I blacked out? How long had I been wandering? I approached the broken-down car, middle of nowhere, lights approaching. The air was still, thick with the scent of damp earth and pine needles. The hum in my bones intensified, a low, ominous frequency. My gaze fixed on the approaching lights, two pinpricks growing steadily larger in the rearview mirror, reflecting off the shattered glass. Headlights, a vehicle, another human, rescue. A wave of relief so profound it almost brought me to my knees washed over me. I lifted, ready to flag them down. My voice was a dry croak, but I forced it out. "Hey, over here." As the lights drew closer, illuminating the broken-down car and my own ragged form in their harsh glare, I felt a strange shift. The hum in my bones changed, deepening, resonating with an unfamiliar power. It wasn't just a vibration anymore, it was a presence. Not outside me, not around me, but inside. A subtle pressure behind my eyes, a peculiar clarity. The driver, a large man in a baseball cap, leaned across the seat, peering at me. His face was a mask of concern, then confusion. He rolled down the window. "You all right, friend? What happened here?" I tried to speak, to explain, but the words caught in my throat. My mouth opened, but what came out wasn't my voice. It was soft, barely audible, but I heard it and I knew. The man's brow furrowed. He leaned out further, trying to make sense of the sound. What was that? The hum intensified, a silent symphony playing just for me. Was I truly free?